Welcome to our Spring 2021 Bookathon. This is Bold Strokes Books. My name is Carsen Taite, and I'm here with our very first panel, The Well of Ideas. And we're excited that you all are here. We have a whole weekend of events planned. If you'd like to check in for the rest of the schedule, you can go to boldstrokesbooks.com. There's a link right there on the front page that'll take you to where you can register. So without further ado, I'd like to go around the room, the virtual room that we're still in, and have our panelists give a quick intro of themselves, maybe mention their most recent title, and we'll start with Aurora Ray.
It's Carsen. I'm Aurora Ray. I'm a college dean by day. Angstfully so at this time of the semester, where I've decided to pretty much say yes to every request for exceptions. I'm utterly blanking. I spent the day outside, and so I think my brain is sort of awash in sunshine. But my latest release is You Again. It's a second chance romance that came out in April that I'm really excited about, and I'm thrilled to be here. Always.
Happy to have you. Jessie J. Thoma, will you tell us a little about yourself?
I am Jessie Thoma. I work in behavioral and addiction research by day. And my latest release is Courage. It deals with some of the topics that I work in my day job. And so it's kind of near and dear to my heart. I'm looking forward to this panel. It sounds like we're going to have a really good time.
Excellent. Lee Patton?
Hi, I'm Lee Patton. My most recent book is Coming to Life on South High, which just came out in March. I don't really have an interesting profession to describe. I was an high school English teacher, and that you can't get more banal than that. But I was able to retire young and devote myself to writing. So I'm living the life I always wanted to live. Well,
and you have the little critter there who's like capturing our arts.
And he just decided to join me. He's looking for the limelight, I think.
Well, I remember fondly almost all of my high school English teachers. So, you know, I'm kudos to you.
Thank you
for teaching. And last but not least, we have, what's your name? Melissa Brayden.
That's me. Yeah, I also look back at, I think the English teachers are the ones that stick out in my head that really resonate. But no, I'm Melissa Brayden. I write fun and flirty contemporary romance and enjoy doing it. And what I'm talking about today, or why I'm on the Bookathon, is I have the third in the Tangle Valley romance series, What a Tangled Web. It's the last book in the series, but all three can be read as a standalone.
The trio of wine novels.
That's right.
All right, so I'm just going to toss out our first question, and we're talking about where we come up with ideas and inspiration. And so some authors who are authors, some authors come up with characters first and then craft the story around them, while others hatch their plots and then populate them with the right people to see it through. Describe your process and where it fits along the character plot spectrum. And I'm going to toss this one out to Jessie first.
All right, that's kind of tough. I think it's kind of project driven. So sometimes I have a character or a type of person that I kind of want to build around. And sometimes I have a story that I want to tell. And then I kind of think about who fits into this story, what kind of person would be in this story, who are their friends, who are their family. For Serenity, which is sort of interrelated with Courage, which is my current release, I knew that I wanted it to be about somebody who is recovering from a heroin addiction. And so that character I knew was going to drive the story. And so I needed to kind of think about who was she, what's her background, how did she get to where she was, where is she now? So that one was much more character driven. For Courage, I knew that I wanted it to be about a specific dynamic between the two characters. And so then it was more building from that plot line and then figuring out, okay, who are these characters and how are they building from each other? So I think it really depends on kind of the story that I want to tell. So I don't have a specific answer to that question. It really depends on the story that I'm telling.
So you're flexible.
Yeah. It's kind of whatever I'm working with in that story.
So Serenity and Courage aren't your first books, but are they your first books where you really kind of focused on like your career or aspects of your career?
Kind of. I think that always sort of pulls into my work. I think I like writing about sort of the messiness of people and maybe the parts of people that they try to hide or are a little bit ashamed of, because I think that everybody has that, and everybody has the parts of, I guess, maybe the realer parts, or the parts that are people are less likely to talk about. And that's the part of people that I find the most interesting. And I think we're a little bit less likely to write about or talk about or highlight. And so I think that always kind of seeps into my work a little bit, but this is the first time that it's been sort of the focus, I think.
Gotcha. Well, I think those peeling back the layer kind of books really resonate with readers. Aurora, how about you? Character, plot, both? A little bit of each?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the story. I think that's one of the really fun things about writing is that there's not a one size fits all, even if you have I always write pretty fluffy kind of butch femme pairings. There's always sort of a foodie element. I mean, they're even within having a lot of aspects of sort of an identity or a brand, you can go in so many different directions. And I think sometimes I start with characters or even setting. When I wrote books set in Provincetown, it was very much like, okay, well, who's in Provincetown, right? There are only so many, you don't have a college professor in Provincetown because there's not. So it's sort of fun sometimes to start with that. With you again, my latest, it was the first time I started with kind of a plot or a sort of conflict that what would happen if high school sweethearts broke up because one of them got pregnant, and they sort of came back together. So it's kind of fun to dabble in different directions, I think.
I agree. I think that's a really good point. So how many second chance romances have you written?
This is my first. The last place you looked was a little bit of a reunion. That's right. I had a crush on the other, but this is the first time there was a pre-existing relationship, and they sort of got back together, and it was a lot of fun to write.
So did you like it? It's like a fun trope for you?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I think second chances, you sort of have so much history baked in some ways that's really nice. It can be a little tricky because you have to figure out why they broke up, and I sort of had a cheating line, although I think at 17, I was pretty quick to forgive my characters, and some readers, even at 17, they're like, that's not okay. But I think it's really fun. I think that won't be my last second chance.
Awesome. So Melissa, how about you?
Well, I'm kind of a procrastinator. I should admit that right off. But I will get the work done, but I often will wait until the last minute. So if I had a 30-page paper due in grad school and I'm writing it the night before, that's me to kind of give you the backstory. So when I'm searching for inspiration, there is an element of desperation. And I need to figure out what I'm going to write, and I need to do it quickly. So it's whatever I can grasp onto that will lead me down the path to a book that I think, oh, I can definitely write that story. And so it can come character. When I look back at my backlist, I notice more that the setting or the backdrop, if you were to say Waiting in the Wings is a theater book, the theater came first, and then I populated with who was going to live there. So I guess the world seems to be my go-to, but it isn't always that way. And I do try to get away with knowing as little as possible going into it, because I really do thrive more in a pantser environment where I'm making it up by the seat of my pants as I go. And when I need secondary characters, it's usually in the moment where, this person needs a friend. Who could it be? And in that scene, I'll come up with a friend that then will live on the page till the end. But I usually don't know that stuff going in unless it's something that's, you know, built into the blurb, which a lot of people don't realize. We write these blurbs well in advance of writing the book for marketing purposes so that we can get out to everybody. It can get to the places that need it. And so, for example, I was writing a blurb yesterday where I knew that I was going to write a big family and all the siblings were going to be named after flowers. And it was going to annoy the hell out of my main character that she was named after a flower with all these siblings. So now I know those siblings have to be there, but that's pretty rare. I don't always know that.
Daffodil.
I might name one of them Daffodil. Thank you. I should write that down.
So I've seen reviewers call you the queen of the small town romance, which I thought was interesting because I think you are, but I first read your books, you know, I always think of the Soho Loft series.
Yeah, I wrote The Big City first.
Totally. So what's your favorite of those, or do you have a favorite?
I don't. I like to mix it up. That blurb I was writing is a small town, but I noticed that there's 3 books in between. So I like to take a break and then come back and just kind of keep it lively, keep it entertaining, and mix up the backdrops. But I think we all go where the water is warm and the backdrops that we're the most comfortable with. And I love writing big city and I love writing small town and everything in between. So I think variety is the spice of life.
No mid-sized cities for Melissa Brayden.
Well, I just wrote Dallas. That's your home. That's your home city. So.
All right, then. So I just want to remind the audience that if you do have questions for our panelists, put those in the Q&A box and we'll take a break midway and take some of those questions. Lee, talk to us. Character, plot, what's your go-to?
I was kind of tripping out just now on Melissa's statement about the flowers, the characters named after flowers. Because I remember that about 10 years ago, I wrote a novel where one of the minor characters was named Brandy, and I decided that her sisters were all named after drinks as well. Like I think one of them was daiquiri, and that creates a kind of a fun way to generate names, but it's kind of silly. To answer the question seriously, I don't really have a good insight into this because what I find is that characters and plot kind of hatch together for me. Like if the plot actually had its origin in some semi-autobiographical incident, let's say, that I want to completely fictionalize into a novel, it seems like the characters flow from the plot and they also contribute the other way. So to me, they're kind of symbiotic. They work together.
I mean, I think you're probably in agreement with what everybody else has said here. I think that that's kind of the upshot of this, that it just kind of depends on the situation. Some books come with characters first and some with plot. And one of our audience members has asked, have you ever envisioned a character developed, fully fleshed them out, fallen in love with them, but they just didn't work for that book, so you set them aside for something else? Anybody?
Wow.
And I would like to have your extra characters to populate my next novel because you're not using them. So,
well, I've had it happen where not quite use that character in a different book, but I've definitely dropped, like in one novel that I'm working on now, I dropped a bad boy younger brother. And then he morphed later on into a much more respectable child of one of the characters. So that morphing can really happen with a character, including gender changes. I'm not sure that addresses the question.
It's a version for sure.
I've never used them in a different book.
Anybody have some leftover people?
And I haven't had it happen with a character, but I did just this week. This week references. I did just have a setting that I was trying to decide between two, And I really liked both of them. And I kept running both concepts by different people, and they liked both of them. So I'm going to shelve the other one. Basically, I was having to decide whether the main character's love interest was going to be a veterinarian or the owner of a lingerie shop. And I had these two parallel universes of how they would interact with these two different, and I liked them both, and I couldn't decide. Veterinarian with lingerie shop, I can imagine this, but the vet is this. And so I had to shelve one of them, and I'm going back to it, and I just have to rework it into a new book. But I so many ideas for scenes were percolating that I can't let go of it. So I'll hold on.
Which one won, the lingerie or the vet?
Okay, so it's the flower book. And so currently we're going with the veterinarian that's coming to town temporarily, just to fill in, you know, as temporary vets do. And but the lingerie shop will be written about at some point soon. So that's a similar parallel, it's just not a character, it's a setting.
Anybody else have an answer for that one? Have any extra characters laying around?
I don't think I developed them so fully before I start writing that I would have to set them aside. I've had to make some fairly wholesale changes to a character once I start writing. When I was writing the Inn at Netherfield Green, I sort of had these two characters and I couldn't, like, they just weren't clicking. And then I resorted to one of my old like character development strategies of doing like a Myers-Briggs-esque personality profile. And they were only off by one letter. And I realized that they were too similar and like the whole sort of premise of the story is that they had to like learn from each other and work together. Well, they were so similar, like it just didn't work. So I had to like change the inherent personality.
I love that you gave them the personality test. That's a great idea.
Like, oh no, we're going to be an extrovert now because that's what needs to happen.
How about you, Jesse?
I guess I do have a couple of instances. So the main character in Courage was she's a social worker, and she's someone who I've been like holding on to for quite a number of years and kind of kept trying to jam her into other books. And I was like, doesn't work here. And so I think it wasn't that I scrapped it from another book, but it was like this was a character I kind of knew that I had percolating and kind of wanted to put somewhere, but then didn't have the right story. And then I kind of developed this story idea and was like, wait, finally, this is your book. So she found her home. And interestingly, her love interest in this one was a completely different character, like not a police officer, was a like shopkeeper. And through the proposal process was changed completely. So maybe there'll be a place for the character that got scrapped somewhere down the line. I don't know. We'll see.
If you need extra characters, she's got them. So Melissa brought up something. So talk about setting and whether or not, do you ever start with just like a place or a setting and then go and work everything around that? My sister buys shoes and then she builds a whole outfit around that. So setting is like shoes. Lee?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just thinking about that on a walk I took before the panel. That setting is really inspirational for me. In a broad sense, living in Denver and especially with the Colorado high country and all my adventures there has been like a lifelong backdrop of like a wellspring of inspiration in terms of both settings and of course actions that take place in those settings. And more specifically, I was thinking of my most recent novel, which is called Coming to Life on South High, meaning South High Street, which is only about, a couple of blocks from where I live now. But it's also where I went to graduate school. And I lived with a bunch of people in a sort of sketchy student pad, and I was, one snowy day, I was walking in that neighborhood and all these guys were out in front of that house. and their car had stalled, and it had stalled in the snow, and they had trouble maneuvering it. So I helped them push it. And then after that was all over, we got to talking, and they lived in that house. And I was just flooded with nostalgia and memory, and all these things were going off in my head about that past experience of having lived there, and the characters who lived there with me. Not the characters then, they were people, but they all morphed into characters in my novel and led me to write this book. So setting, I think, can be profoundly inspiring.
I think you're right about that. Aurora, how about you? You live in a setting.
I mean, I'm doing a lot of like kind of farm and DIY kind of set books. But my very first book, Winter's Harbor, I had sort of resolved that I was going to let myself write a romance novel, which was like the books I always love to read. And I had just finished reading Land's End, which is Michael Cunningham's book about Provincetown. In a lot of it was about Provincetown in the winter. And I was just so enamored with the idea of that was the first thing I decided about the book. And then when I sort of turned it into the Cape Ann series, because I just love Provincetown so much, and I just wanted to keep setting books there. And I think the same has happened for me with New Orleans, which is another place I just sort of love. And it I think lends itself to some fun and unique character types, and that whole story sort of evolve. And the setting, the place is the first thing.
Setting becomes a character for sure in your work. Jesse, how about you? Setting important to you? Is it ever inspirational?
I think in some of my stories, it leads a little bit more than others. I think it's kind of like whether character drives the story or plot drives the story. Sometimes I kind of have the story and then I think like, where would this happen? And then you kind of build from there. It's kind of like, what characters would inhabit this world? Where would this happen? And then in others, I wrote this like action adventure, kind of like a action movie series, which is very much how I envisioned it. If you were watching an action movie, you just were reading it on the page. The first one's called The Chase. And that one I set in Providence because I know Providence, I lived there. It's very much like, I know the streets. So if you're in a car chase, I can tell you exactly where things are. And Providence just has this like feel that I can really capture. And I felt like it was important to put that on the page because it really kind of built on what I was wanting to put in there. So in that book, I felt like the setting and having a very specific setting was important. For Serenity and Courage, I kind of wanted the setting to be not as well defined because I felt like mental health issues, substance abuse issues are so disparate and just spread out in our communities that I didn't want to say this is happening in Boston, this is happening in San Francisco. So I kind of left it like this could be any American city, big, small. So I didn't really define a setting. And I kind of did that intentionally because I didn't want to really nail it down to a place. I wanted people to kind of be able to put their backyard, their neighborhood, their city into their imagination when they're reading it.
That makes a lot of sense. Melissa, setting, let's see, we've got New York, small town, winery, things you hate, donut shop.
They don't apply to me at all. No, but I think you hit the nail on the head. They all tie to me. So I guess I'm just not really thrilled about research. So I really do gravitate to things that I've experienced or liked, and then really want to spend more time in that world, whether it's, going to Napa and wine tasting and then wanting to write about it. Or I remember going on a foodie tour in San Francisco and we went to this amazing truffle shop that really resonated with me. And then I had to write a chocolate shop with how sweet it is. And then when I look at Seven Shores, that was the apartment complex I lived in college. It was very Melrose Place with all the apartments facing inward to a central courtyard. And I could just imagine all these things happening that never did to me in college, happening in that kind of setup. And so I wanted to write about it. So I do look at my own life and think, oh yeah, those settings were all there. And those were books that they were populated by setting first. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that is. So let's see. Oh, this is, do you ever read nonfiction that inspires a fictional story or that some story that parallels real life events? And so that kind of riffs off a question I had. And what's your go-to method for coming up with story ideas? So news stories, documentaries, eavesdropping on strangers. Do you just have an exciting donut wine drinking life? So I'll toss this one out to Aurora.
I think for me, one of the go-to starting points is profession. I think sort of what people choose to do with their lives says a lot about them and determines a lot of sort of how they move about the world and spend their time. And so I often pick things that I either already know about, because I'm a little bit like Melissa sometimes and don't want to do too much research, or I pick something I want to learn about that I think is really fascinating. You know, I've done a lot of bakers and college professors. That's a lot of my existence. But you know, I did a lobsterman for one of the Provincetown books, and like used it as an excuse to go on a like sport fishing and lobster charter to like, you know, really immerse myself in like, what is it like to be out on the water and to like pull lobster traps and like that's so much fun. So I think that's often a starting point. I think real life comes in more with the smaller details, quirks of your friends or maybe your colleagues that you aren't as fond of, things that you overhear. That's where like those little details that make characters interesting come through. You can give them like personality tics and kind of catchphrases and things that make them feel real and that you've kind of stolen from what you've seen.
I like that. The people you've puzzled together with little parts of others. Lee, how about you?
First of all, I just wanted to comment that I'm fascinated by the sun across Aurora's face.
Oh.
It's beautiful, and it goes so well with her name. Speaking of names, looks like she's in heaven or something. Yeah, that a lot of times there's an intersection between real events, nonfiction, bodies of study, and fiction. That, in my fiction at least, that again is a great wellspring of ideas. Like in my current novel, there was a news story that was quite troubling here in Greater Denver. There were two women who I think it was just before, you know, they allowed us to get married, but they were a longtime couple, and they had a child, and that child was in a Catholic school in Boulder. And the Catholic school decided that because these two women were gay, the child had to be expelled from the school. And it created this kind of cognitive dissonance in me that is another sort of driver from that well of ideas. Like, I just can't get the conflict in my head out of my head because it makes me so furious that I just kept concentrating on how could they be so cruel to a child, like expel the child from the school because they didn't approve of the parents. And that led to a whole movement in my novel about that happening to a fictional couple in my novel and how they dealt with it. I just had to imagine, because I didn't know these women, but it definitely was the source of that idea.
Thank you, Lee. Jesse, I'm going to go to you next because I feel like your book and a lot of the major conflict that's set up between the two characters is extremely timely. And I have to think you pulled a little bit from what's going on in the world. So will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, so when I started out, so Courage is about a police officer and a ride-along social worker who she's paired with, who is her sole purpose is to go on calls where mental health or substance use issues are suspected or are the main driver of that 911 call, and to be a diffuser of that situation, hopefully without use of force or escalating to even needing necessarily police involvement. And so there's a lot of conflict because the police character is, you know, a little hesitant to have somebody come in and tell her how to do her job. She feels like she's a civilian and, you know, is now unarmed and is a burden to her and a safety risk. And so it became maybe even more timely than I thought that it would. But I was writing it during the summer when George Floyd was murdered and there were protests all over the country. And I just kept thinking, like, this is something that is just so weighing heavily on me. I am white and privileged and didn't have to think as deeply over my life as I should have been. And this it gave me an opportunity to really think in a way that I hadn't before. And I was really grateful for the opportunity to do that. And I didn't want to make it a political novel. I didn't want to shove something down people's throat. It's a romance novel, but I did want to introduce some things that I felt like, you know, should be in a book about a police officer and a mental health clinician. And I had the story before the news, but it just was such an opportunity to kind of meld the two current events and what it was already planned. And I feel like I hopefully walked a line that is acceptable to readers, but it was much more timely and the crashing of current events than I certainly expected when I proposed the book.
Well, based on the reviews I've seen, the readers think you handled it very thoughtfully. So
Well, thank you.
Thank you for that. Melissa, you've written about a real life incident, or maybe?
No.
That's okay.
Not necessarily a real life incident, but when I think about nonfiction, and I don't have a parallel for like reading a nonfiction book, but I think I'm a big fan of the documentary, of any type of reality TV, and YouTube is great for that. And I did watch a short series. I want to say, I don't know if it was Vogue. It was sponsored by a magazine that followed the School of Ballet that fed into the New York City Ballet and followed those kids as they went to school. And that was part of what made me want to write First Position, which was a ballet book, because it really gave me a sneak peek into that world and reinforced my belief in myself that I could get it right, just because I felt like I was absorbing so much information about the topic. So not a nonfiction book, but a real life look behind the scenes.
Ballet. Love it. Aurora, how about you? Did we already? No, we didn't. You have no longer have a halo.
It's that time of year where light that wasn't a problem a week ago is now a problem. So
Disappears.
We were talking about real life. Maybe I missed the question. I thought I answered, but
you know, it's kind of morphed. The OG question was, do you have you ever written something based on a nonfiction thing you've read or seen? And I've just kind of spun that. If you haven't, then what other things inspire you? What's your go-to for inspiration?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit like Melissa. I don't read a lot of like biographies or things like that. But I'm a sucker for documentaries. I mean, I love animal documentaries. I just watched the beaver one. I watch it every year. I highly recommend it. It's great on Prime. They're fascinating. But I digress. But like right now I'm writing a character who is a cider maker, who makes hard cider. And so sort of diving into like that world and that culture, I'm following a lot of the local, like really small batch cideries. And it's a very personal kind of experience. And so trying to follow people. It's hard with the pandemic to like kind of shadow people as they go about their day job, but watching documentaries and that kind of thing to absorb what that day in the life feels like, I think is one of the most fun parts of writing, and one of the things that makes storytelling really authentic, when you can weave in details that don't sound like or come across like you're trying to lecture people on how something works, but it sort of feels like what that person would really be doing in their day.
Well, now I'm waiting for the beaver book, and I need to know when that's coming out.
I'm working on the secret baby goat right now, so
Okay,
like
beaver will be next.
Beaver, okay, it's happening.
All right, I'm holding you to
The
it.
secret baby goat came out of one of the bookathons, and
Yes.
a ridiculous like thread that happened in the chat. And so, okay, I mark my word, there will be a beaver.
Beavers and baby goats for everyone.
Can't wait.
So I remember two years ago, I've lost all track of time. I guess it was 3 years ago now in England. Didn't you learn how to make gin? You went and made gin. You made your own bottle of gin for a book.
For a book, it was this great place where you could go and do kind of a class on the history and making of gin. And we learned a lot. I don't know if I've ever been that drunk in public before, because there were like 5 cocktails over the course of the class. It was a lot of fun. But one of the things they did was they had probably 50 distillates of like all the different flavor elements that could go into gin. And we tasted literally every single one of them, probably part of the drunkenness. But then you got to blend your own bottle with like different combinations. And that experience I sort of like scooped up and plopped into my book, into the Inn at Netherfield Green, which features a gin distiller. Thank you, Carsen.
You're welcome.
But yeah, like I think that's the most fun. Like you think about like, what do I want to do? And like that I can justify as book research. Like that is the single best thing about being a writer. And you get to just go do random things like, oh, it's research.
Exactly. All right. Well, here's a good question. Titles, because we always think about the story and being inspired by character and plot and setting and everything, but coming up with a title requires some inspiration. So I'm going to make this a 2-part question. How do you come up with your titles, and do you do it before, during, or after you've written your story? And I'm going to jump to Jesse on this one first. You've got great built-in titles for this series. So
yeah, I'm really bad at coming up with titles. So when I was writing these, I was very happy that they're just built in. They're based on the Serenity Prayer. So there's serenity, courage, and wisdom. Done. Those titles are perfect. I've already got them. But after these 3, when I'm writing more, I'm back to being terrible at titles. I feel like I kind of have working titles, and sometimes they stick and sometimes it's just working title. I don't know, I'll come up with something better. But I'm really bad at titles. It's definitely a work in progress. Sometimes it just comes to me like midway through the first draft, and I get nervous when it gets close to the end of the first draft and I still don't have anything. That's when I really start to sweat.
You need a title buddy,
I do. I desperately need a title buddy.
Melissa, how about you? You're pretty good. You love titles, don't you?
Love writing titles. I would rather write titles than books. It's my favorite. I just get to
my title buddy.
Fun with it. Yeah. I remember titling the 7 Shores books and wanting them all to come together, and eyes like those, hearts like hers, sparks like ours, and it was just fun. And I had a long list of like 20 of those things. But the title can sometimes be really inspirational. Somebody was talking about Strawberry Summer on the chat bar, and it reminded me about how that book even came to be. And it was because I was helping a writer friend. It was Georgia Beers. She was writing A Little Bit of Spice about beer, and was looking for titles. And I was just riffing off the top of my head and said Strawberry Summer, which I thought, well, that's a great title. And she didn't want it. I know. And I said, well, I'm going to write it then. And she was like, fine, write it. And so I did. And so the book was sprung just from that conversation. And so I think you can write to a title. I know some people are critical of that, but I'm not. I say do it. But it's so much fun to come up with all these different options. And then you have so much regret for the ones that you think are good but didn't quite make it, and you feel bad for them.
Well, Jessie's raising her hand for those, so you just send those to her. Aurora, how about you?
I mean, you have to write a title before the book because your metadata is due before the book is due. So sort of have to commit to a title. Sometimes they just come and it's lovely, and sometimes it's so painful. And I'm a huge fan of like a short little like saying or phrase, but that like has like not terribly punny, but like that has a second meaning. And you know, Melissa, Carsen, like you're masters of that. I can't believe, Carsen, that you're still coming up with like legal phrases that like can have like a sexy or romantic meaning. Like, how is that even possible? But it when it does click, it's really fun. It's the book I'm working on right now. I veered off from like the farm theme to like the hard cider, and I really, really fell in love with the title Hard Pressed, because I thought like it, but apparently that had too much sexual connotation. Apparently you have to be really careful of like being too sexual with your titles. But I'm gonna pull a Melissa Brayden, and I'm totally gonna write a book to that title because I like it so much. So it's gonna come.
Yeah.
You absolutely should. Jessie's sad now because she doesn't get it, but I really like Twice Shy, you know, because everybody knows the rest of the saying, and it's just kind of fun to have that little hint to it, and wonder how that's going to factor in. So I really like that.
It's one of the few that just was like magic. Like if you can get 2 words to like convey all that, it's hard sometimes with like 2 to 3 words.
Yeah, it is. How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I could use an idea buddy for titles, or a title fairy, maybe.
There you go.
But yeah, no, it's very difficult. I agree with everyone. And then if the horrible part is if you end up with a title that's kind of a clunker, you get to live with it forever. And you know, if you're talking to somebody about your titles, you get to say that title over and over again for the rest of your life. So it's a big decision. But it is interesting that the whole concept that the title, that there can be like a connection between the title and inspiration, but I'm not sure what it is.
So there's another audience question that kind of riffs off this, I think, and that is coming up with names for your characters. So we already know about the flower children. I'm like stuck on geranium and short.
That's a great one.
Jerry for short, you know, but anyway, you're welcome. But she's like, no, I don't like it.
Oh, I like it, I do.
So how do you come up with unique character? No, you're fine. How do you come up with unique character names? And I personally find that very difficult to keep doing. And so I'm going to call on Lee.
Character names. I think in a number of different strategies. Like in the olden days, I used to use the phone book for good last names and good first names, just to get my mind going. And also, like in the supermarket once, for about $1, I found this little pamphlet called Baby Names, and it has lots and lots of names for men and women and boys and girls, and their meaning in like mythology or whatever. And that's actually been a great resource. It's completely like crumbling away in my hands now because I've used it so many times. And lately I've been thinking about, maybe it's because I'm not as young as I used to be. I'm thinking about how names change over time. And if you set a story in a certain period, you really now have to match it with names because names have become very faddish. And so that can be a really interesting, inspirational topic in and of itself. Is like, where did the name Madison come from? You know, was that born of Daryl Hannah in that movie about the mermaid on Madison Street? And would somebody born in 1981 have that name because of that movie and all the etymologies of these different names? So that, just the names that age well, the names that don't age well, the names that give connotations that they shouldn't. Like, I remember once in a writing workshop, one of our fellow students named a character Christine, which is fine, but her parents were observant Jews. So I don't think they would name her daughter Christine. So, you know what I mean? You kind of have to think about, you also have to think about their parentage and what their parents were like and what the mom was going through when she named you. And it's interesting.
There's a lot of considerations. Aurora, how do you come up with names, and do you find it easy or hard, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was much more precious about naming characters in my first couple of books because it felt so important. And then when you start writing a lot, it's like, I've learned the big lesson to like not waste a really cool name on a secondary character that's not going to get their own story because then you're sort of stuck. I do a lot of Googling like baby name sites, but I think Lee makes a really good point about like sort of time frame, and that like, you know, the names that were trendy in the 70s are not the names that were trendy in the 90s. And if you're writing a character, you know, in their late 20s, like, then sort of really thinking about that, I think it's a great way to sort of have a nod to sort of culture or family. I was giggling over Melissa's flower names because there was that old Britcom. I remember watching it when I was a kid, and all the characters were named. It was Hyacinth Bouquet, and her sisters were Daisy and Rose. I don't know. I was obsessed with that show. I was a very odd child, I think. But I think it's really fun. You can sort of bake in a little bit about the character. And because I tend to write butch femme pairings, I have this really long running list of androgynous names, and I get to give my butch characters androgynous names, which I know many of my butch friends sort of wish they had and don't. So that's just a sort of fun, like, little magic I get to do because I get final say.
That's awesome. Jesse, names? You like naming?
Yeah, so I'm terrible at titles. I love names.
Okay.
We all have our thing. Yeah, I use, instead of a hand baby name book, I use the website Nameberry, which is just a website version of a baby name book. And it has meanings and, I don't know, like 50,000 names or something like that. Coreopsis is a great flower name if you need another one.
Awesome.
But I think that I often do try to put some thought into names, the time frame that the characters were born in, the culture that they come from, and sometimes just the feel or the type of person that they are. If they're a butch character, do they have an androgynous name? Do they have a really girly name? Are they annoyed by that? Encourage both of the main character, that's the police officer, and her sister are named after their father. And so one of them is Thomasina, the other one's Henrietta, because their father is Thomas Henry. And so it just, like, that is just part of their family, is they're just really tied to this very strong family unit. So I think that names are really important. And although I probably spend a little too much time doing it, I definitely put a lot of thought into it. And academic journals are a great way to get like really weird, random last names that you haven't thought about. So sometimes I just, when I'm at work, I just can scroll through academic journals to get really strange last names that are not just ones that I can think of off the top of my head. So that's another go-to name place for me that probably most people don't just scroll through.
So we're coming to the end of our panel. Melissa, why don't you round us out on this topic? And
sure, I just have to like the name. That's pretty simple. I've looked into all these methods, and I wish I went as deep as everybody, but I just want to like the name. And I was like holding back certain female names for if I ever had a child, which I am having. And so now those names have been released, the ones I didn't use. So I have this whole new barrel of names I get to use. I'm very excited.
That is awesome. That is a unique consideration. All right. Well, I just want to remind everyone that select ebook titles are on sale for 15% off. You can follow the link in the chat. Our next session is an author chat with two new Bold Strokes authors, B.D. Grayson and Sandra Santiago. And I want to thank all of our panelists, Melissa, Brayden, Jesse, J. Thoma, Lee Patton, and Aurora Ray for opening up our Bookathon today. Y'all have a splendid weekend. We look forward to seeing you all weekend.
Yay. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
You.